This is Democracy Watch. Mark, there is a major threat looming by this administration, completely unprecedented as it relates to Donald Trump's broader attack on the left. It was widely publicized and reported on that Trump is looking to crack down on any left-leaning nonprofits, so any organizations that are left of center. We now have an update on what those organizations are doing to push back. Can you explain what happened?
Yeah, this is a good example of what an effective opposition movement does. More than 100 organizations, nonprofit organizations, signed a letter, got together, and essentially committed that they will have each other's back. Donald Trump has moved from weaponizing government against his political opponents, that is still going on. Look no further than what he's doing with Tish James, to cracking down on dissent. And that's a much scarier thing. I mean, it is one thing to go after John Bolton, as terrible as that is, Congresswoman MacGyver, and that's horrifically terrible, Tish James and the like. But the wholesale crackdown on dissent, on people who make jokes at his expense, people who publish commentary he doesn't like, and in this case, nonprofit organizations that fund causes that he doesn't like. This is a much, much more advanced stage in the totalitarian playbook. And so these nonprofit organizations, facing the prospects of this, and we haven't yet seen an executive order, but Donald Trump has made clear, and Lord knows members of his inner circle have made clear that something is coming. They are taking the preemptive step of basically banding together and putting on a united front. And, we talked a lot about this, about the law firms. We talked a lot about this with respect to the universities, how things might have been different if when the first attacks were coming, rather than some cutting deals and some staying silent and some being targeted, if they had all taken a united front together. So look, the devil will be not just in the details, but whether these kinds of things hold together when in fact some are singled out. But it is a very good sign that at least this part of the pro-democracy movement is making plans.
Mark, you look at, for example, when Elon Musk went after Media Matters, and ultimately that whole effort wasn't successful for Elon. But in the meantime, because any investigation or any litigation is inherently going to be expensive, that unto itself may be enough to cripple some of these organizations that A, have to contend with not knowing what the future is going to look like, B, have to contend with the inordinate amount of expenses that they're going to incur by virtue of having to defend themselves. And so it doesn't just the prospect of having to defend yourselves from what may very well be weaponized government and vindictive prosecutions, isn't that alone enough to really accomplish Trump's goal if he's seeking to cripple these organizations?
It may be. I mean, look, you pointed out exactly right that, and, you can see any number of examples in society of where, the mere burden of fighting the federal government or fighting state governments or fighting billionaires, that burden itself can be crippling. And as you say, can have the same effect as if they were successful.
Right.
But, we've also seen the counterexamples. I mean, I would point to what we saw Governor Pritzker do in Illinois as the counterexample. He didn't sit back and wait for the National Guard to be deployed. He proactively said to the public, this bad thing is going to happen and we are not going to stand for it. He made clear that there was not going to be acquiescence. And, there is something to the Trump always chickens out phenomenon.
Yeah.
And it's not just over tariffs. Like, if you see these very, very large private foundations and public charities, some of which have very, very deep pockets. I mean, some of which are, multi-billion-dollar charities or have huge endowments, banding together with smaller organizations. Maybe it does, at the margin at least, affect what Donald Trump is going to do. Maybe he doesn't want to pick up a fight where, there are going to be not just one or two, smaller players who we can pick off, but there's going to be a concerted effort against them. Again, it's hard to know the counterfactual, but I come back to the law firms. If on day one, every law firm had said, if you sue one law firm, we will intervene as defendants, which, in other words, we will literally make ourselves defendants in the case. So when there is one law firm, it is against all of us. We will treat it against all of us. Maybe it would have been different because maybe, you would have had a circumstance in which Donald Trump wasn't prepared to take on every law firm. He was prepared to take on a few and then try to get all others out of the way. I mean, look what we have witnessed with the legacy media. What would have happened if all of the legacy media, the first time that Donald Trump kicked the AP out of the press pool? Remember that?
Right.
Like, it feels like it was a million years ago. It wasn't, but it was one of the very first instances of Donald Trump saying, I can leverage my power and pick out just the Associated Press, right? Not one of the biggest, I mean, the Associated Press is huge and plays a vital role, but not one of the highest profile television networks, for example. And if all of the television networks and all of the newspapers had said, if AP is not there, we're just not going to cover you.
Yeah.
We're not going to put you on TV. We're not going to mention our newspaper. Like, you will be operating in a news vacuum. I suspect that AP would have been invited back into that pool, but instead you saw this divide and conquer. So I'm not going to prejudge this is going to be successful, but I also want to give them credit for trying, and maybe it will be more successful than it would have been otherwise.
Yeah, I completely agree. And insofar as anybody in that world is watching, I know that very often there's a scarcity mindset when it comes to these organizations exactly. that are trying to raise money from funders who fund one organization but not another. The continued existence of all of these organizations, as we've learned from the AP situation, relies on organizing. And if these groups are not willing to come together when one of them is under attack, all of them are going to be under attack, whether they recognize it or not. So I think that's a really great point that you brought up. I'm curious, when it comes to the federal government engaging in vindictive prosecution, if a private citizen does it, there are remedies, right? There are slap suits. You can engage in a countersuit, and that's kind of a deterrent from somebody engaging in some frivolous litigation. But I'm curious if there's any remedy for people who are the victims of vindictive prosecution when it comes to the federal government.
In theory, yes, but in practice, no. I mean, there are, in theory, some ways that you can recover attorney's fees, but they're very, very difficult to prove. The federal government is immune as a baseline from any liability, and it is only where it waives it that it can have liability. And look, the system was not set up for a administration-wide bad faith policy of using the Department of Justice to go after political opponents. It was not set up for a administration that did not care about the rule of law, but was going to just use both the bully pulpit and the litigation lectern as tools to punish political opponents. So I don't think that is where people are going to get their vindication. They're going to go through a lot of expense. They're going to go through a lot of heartburn. They're going to go through a lot of sleepless nights. But I will tell you, as someone who has been sued by Donald Trump sued me for racketeering in 2022, and I didn't settle that case. It never occurred to me to settle the case. I didn't try to compromise. I didn't try to mediate. There were nothing. Like, we litigated and we won. And now Donald Trump is appealing that victory that we had to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. And the only thing Donald Trump will ever get out of me is another court saying that he was wrong. And, the fact is that what I hope that litigation by me and by a lot of other people who are sued in the same lawsuit, who are braver than I am, what I'm hoping that does is it gives the next person who is sued a little more courage. And then at some point, Donald Trump will stop bringing these lawsuits because he doesn't want to lose them, right? Yeah. Like, he doesn't want to be viewed as a perpetual loser in these civil lawsuits. And I think the same thing is true here with the nonprofits and with the law firms. Like, it's interesting because Donald Trump, went after a couple of law firms, and then a whole bunch settled. And then he went after some more and they fought back. And we haven't really heard him going after any more law firms. And it may be because, having gone after the second bunch and having now 4 different federal judges rule against him, he's decided that's enough. And that's why I mentioned the Pritzker thing in Chicago. Like, it's not clear how high Donald Trump's tolerance is for losing.
Yeah. He doesn't go after people because they're strong. He goes after people expressly when he sees weakness. And so when people fight back, inherently, that's going to dissuade him from engaging further.
That's exactly right. And so I wish that's a lesson that the legacy media would learn. I wish that's a lesson that all the universities would learn. I wish the law firms had learned it earlier. But it is good to see at least some in the nonprofit community seem to have learned that lesson.
Is there a world in which, if Trump goes after some of these entities in the nonprofit world, that they could come together. I don't know whether it would look like a class action lawsuit or whether it's even some type of nonprofit NATO. Is there some way that even in the legal space that these organizations can come together and kind of fight back as one if the same basis is used, the same legal basis is used to go after them individually?
Yeah, your description of it as a nonprofit NATO, I think, is exactly right. And it's something that I hoped to see with the law firms, right? Like, that's why I said the goal would have been that if you go after one law firm, every law firm will dedicate its resources. We will all sign on to every brief. We will all take whatever penalty you are giving to one. We will all treat it as against all of us. And that would make it impractical and also bring enormous resources and attention in that fight against them. You could imagine a world in which the nonprofit groups say, look, if you attack one of our tax exempt statuses, it's fine because we will all use each other's tax exempt statuses. Like, we will mingle programs so that you won't be able to target just one of us. If you sue one of us, we will all get involved in the litigation to split the cost, but also to split the burdens, right? And so that makes it a lot harder for Trump to achieve what he is trying to achieve. It didn't work with law firms. It has not worked with media firms. It's not really worked with the universities. I mean, some of the universities are standing up now because I think they saw that Harvard won and they're worried about, looking like they're capitulating. But there are some out in California, for example, where you live, that are continuing to capitulate. And maybe the nonprofit community will be the one group that gets itself together and does that kind of NATO in advance.
Well, look, I think it's important to note that when it comes to the fighters, you have been first and foremost in that space. You've mentioned, just a few minutes ago that Donald Trump sued you in particular. You had the ability to do what so many in this space have done, whether it's law firms, whether it's universities, whether it's media companies, which we've seen more and more of lately. You decided to fight back. And also, that doesn't just reflect well on you and your team, but it also gives a permission structure for some of these other law firms, some of these other opponents of this administration to know that there is grounds to fight back and win. And so I think one small step that we can all take to show some appreciation for the fighters out there is, if you are not yet subscribed to Democracy Docket, which is the news outlet Mark founded to focus on everything voting and elections, please make sure to subscribe. It's not just an amazing resource that I use on a daily basis. It's also a way to show some support for the people who are doing the hard work, fighting back against this administration, and in Mark's case, really fighting this battle where it's happening right now on ground zero, which is in the courts. So I'm going to put that link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.